Good morning. Thank you for tuning in to the competition timeout. I'm your host, Nando. We're back. It is Thursday, and we're here. Glad you guys are joining. We continue our preview today with the Carolina Panthers. So, what can I say? Carolina Panthers. All right. So, the Carolina Panthers came off a 1-10 season last year. Uh, it was Frank Wright's first year, and he only lasted 1 year. Actually, they won 2-15. What am I talking about? They won 1-10 with Frank Wright as a coach. Then they went 1-5 with the interim head coach. They were a mess. Uh they're still going to be a mess. At least this year. So let me go ahead and go over the some of the additions, some of the losses, and go from there. The additions for the Carolina Panthers. They obviously got a new head coach, Dave Canales, who was the offensive coordinator last year for the Buccaneers. They also fired the GM and hired from within. They hired the assistant GM, Dan Morgan. So it's a new regime, um, head coach and GM. Uh, all season wise, they obviously they traded away Brian Burns. I think that's a big loss. And they let Frankie LaVue walk, who had a really good year for them last year. And they let a couple of other guys go. I believe, but they did sign some people. Shaq Thompson's still there. DJ Johnson. They signed Josie Jewell. So that's a good addition. Um, I think to add a veteran, they signed Jadavian Clowney. As draft, they drafted David Leggett and Jonathan Brooks. That's some good additions on offense. Young additions, they still have to grow on offense as well. They traded for Deontay Johnson from the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they finally got some receiving help for Bryce Young. All right, so let's break down the roster. You got Bryce Young going into his second year. We all know how everybody felt last year, and I'm gonna get into that in a second. Running backs, I said they added Jonathan Brooks. They still have Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders. Receiver, they have Deontay Johnson. They have Jonathan Mingo in his second year. Terrence Marshall, Adam Thielen still there, veteran, and those are the biggest names on that receiving core. Still kind of, and then Leggett. I forgot to mention him. I did mention him earlier. So that's a receiving core. I mean, better than last year. Not crazy. Left to be desired. Tight end, they don't really have like a guy like Tommy Tremble, but they haven't been able to take advantage of his skills. Ian Thomas is okay. Their offensive line is honestly, it's not horrible, but it's also not great. I think it's like middle of the pack somewhere, maybe closer to like the bottom end of it. They have had some injuries. They do have players who are talented, but I guess they just have to put it together and all be healthy and so and so. Uh Defensive line. You got Derek Brown. He's the veteran there. They signed Ashawn Robinson. That can help there. Uh so with those two, but then everybody else around there is kind of unproven, and we'll see what they do. The good thing is, with the coaching changes, they did keep the defensive coordinator. So these guys who are rolling over and aren't new know the defense, and they'll be able to play it. Like I said, at linebacker, inside linebacker Josie Jewell, they still have Shaq Thompson. The good thing about signing Josie Jewell, he was there when the defensive coordinator was with the Broncos. Um, Outside linebacker after losing um, Brian Burns, they do have DJ Johnson, Jadavian Clowney for help. Uh, Mari Barno, a guy that they had for a while. DJ Wanham, who was the Viking, they signed him. Just there's a lot of unknowns there with the pass rush. Uh, they just have a lot of guys, honestly. So we'll see what comes from that. Defensive backfield, they traded Dante Jackson in that trade for Deontay Johnson. So he was probably the best corner. They in free agency they did lose some people here. They still have J.C. Horn. I believe this is his third year. They did sign Jordan Fuller, safety, and still have Xavier Woods. So, all right, overall, it's going to say it for the Panthers. I don't think they might win an extra game or two from last year, but this is going to be another building season. New coach, new GM, basically new staff except on defense. The offensive does look better on paper than it did going into last year. But the defense, besides I guess that defensive line, there's and it only has two people that I can trust. There's a lot of unknowns in the linebacker spot, whether it's inside and edge rushing. Actually, I feel more comfortable with the inside. It's more the edge rushing. The interior defensive line is okay with Ashawn and Brown, but defensive backfield, I mean, it's just a bunch of guys who are, there to prove something, and that could be good. But this is a team who's obviously not going to be ready. Like I said, they might win a game or two. They might be 4 and whatever now, 4-13, but which is an upgrade from last year, but not that much. All right, so before I kind of predicted the record to an extent, so I'm not going to go over the schedule. I am going to go over what I think about the situation in Carolina. So I think that right now we should take into account that obviously there is a new coach after they just had a new coach last year. So Bryce Young is going to his second year with a second coach, second GM. So that's that. That's number one. Before I get into the Bryce Young, I have to explain this to the Bryce Young to make sense. The Carolina Panthers at the moment are one of these um, front offices front offices or management that is very poor. David Tepper is has shown to be a little bit, impatient. I don't want to say out of control, but he's done some things. You guys can look it up. Whether it comes to watching his team get results or not get results, and the decisions he's made. He's very quick to make some decisions, and that creates creates a mess up top. Usually, the teams that are run this way, and I'm not saying it can't be fixed, but he has to check himself at the door. He's part of the problem. It starts at the top. If he's going to be erratic and you know unrealistic about his expectations for the team that he has, I get that he put a big investment to buy the team and he wants to see results, but some things have to be left to grow and given time. You drafted a QB last year, yeah, with a coach who came in and a GM, and now those people aren't there. These people might not be the biggest fan of this quarterback. Okay. And they might be because he's still young and it's still his second year. But David Tepper has to give this staff, if they're okay with Bryce Young, the GM and the coach, they have to give this staff the time it needs to implement what they need to do. You need to get him better receivers than what he has. Good job on getting him Deontay Johnson, but you need to build on that. We'll see if they can. This leads me to Bryce Young. I am not going to sit here, and I think I've said it before in previous episodes, like when the season was ending. I'm not going to sit here and, yes, DJ Stroud had a way better season than Bryce Young, but let's just let's just evaluate the situations. Honestly, Houston was in a slightly better situation than Carolina was, even though Houston's owner has been known to be a little bit of a mess. They haven't been a mess per se as a team more recently. Uh, they have a GM who has been there. They're giving him Nick Casarios, who came from New England. He hired D'Amico Ryans. He was in his first year. And yes, Carolina had Frank Reich, who was more experienced and I think at the time a better coach. But if you look at everything that was around CJ Stroud, it was a lot better than what was around Bryce. I mean, yeah, if you look at what was around CJ Stroud in Houston, it was a lot better than what was around Bryce Young. Um, let's let's just start by the line was shaky. There were some injuries. Number two, Adam Thielen was the number one receiver at 30 something years old. Come on, stop it. They had nobody who could go deep. We have a bunch of possession receivers, and Adam Thielen's not the guy that he was before. Deontay Johnson helps out. Good job with them getting that trade, but they have to have patience. I don't think this is indicative of Bryce Young. Yes, last year was a mess. The Panthers are a mess. And it starts from the top until David Tepper checks himself at the door. This is what happens with most quarterbacks. They go to a bad situation and they don't ever get to develop because either owner is impatient, he's running the team a little crazy, and he doesn't have the patience to let things stick out. And there's constant change for the quarterback, and it doesn't help him develop under one system, under one voice, under one coach. And that's what sets him up for the downfall. And I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, at the moment it looks like the Carolina Panthers made the wrong decision by drafting Bryce Young. Yes, that's what it looks like because CJ Stroud had such a great first year and he went to the playoffs and Bryce Young didn't. But you got to evaluate everything that was around him, honestly. You honestly do. I know it's a talking point for, shows and I should be taking part of that, but I'm not. I'm not ready to make a decision on Bryce Young yet. I think last year was a mess. The front office with David Tepper is a little bit of a mess still. He needs to give this coach and his GM time to develop Bryce Young, give him years to establish and people for to get comfortable with the systems that they're bringing in and everything else in the culture. I don't think this is indicative of Bryce Young. Do I think he should look better this year? Yes, because just adding Deontay Johnson is just better than what they had last year, honestly. But are they going to make the playoffs? Probably not. Probably not. Like I said, a lot of holes on defense. They did keep the same coordinator, but a lot of holes on defense. Offense looks a little better than it did last year, but it might get them 2 more wins. But I look for him to look a little better this year as long as this coach is good enough, as long as this coach is good enough and his staff around him is good enough to, train him and get him back on the right path because I think there's talent there. But I think Carolina Panthers only going to get 2 more wins than they did last year. So, yeah. Tomorrow we come back with the Saints and talk about them. All right. Thank you for tuning into the Competition Timeout. Peace.